Welcome to Halifax Civic Trust's Capturing Memories series. And welcome to Halifax, our fascinating town nestled within the Calder Valley in West Yorkshire, England. At just over 12 square miles and with a population of 88,000, Halifax has a lot to offer. Before we head down to Woolshops, let's go check it out.
Slap bang in the middle of town, we have Halifax's Grade 2 listed Victorian Borough Market, which opened in 1896. Any of its 8 entrances will lead you into this grand building's trading hall, bustling with traditional independent stalls and currently undergoing a multi-million-pound refurbishment. If you attend one of the market's regular guided history tours, you'll also get to explore its hidden Street in the Sky, where an old Victorian hotel and rows of terrace houses stand upon its roof to this day. To the southeast of the Borough Market sits the Grade 1 listed Peace Hall, often referred to as the jewel in Halifax's crown. Before the Industrial Revolution, the town's cloth industry was powered by local weavers, who would buy wool from farmers to spin and then weave into lengths of finished cloth. The Peace Hall was built in 1779 as a trading post for these completed pieces, with each trader occupying one of its 315 rooms. These days, the rooms are filled with independent shops and exhibition spaces, and the Peace Hall attracts visitors from all over the world for its historical significance, its retail opportunities, events, concerts, cafes and bars. The shopping arcade Westgate is simply the street Westgate, brilliantly transformed by a local developer and local architects. It won the Halifax Civic Trust Award in 2007 for its multi-million-pound Phase 1 renovation, which saw the addition of its glass roof canopy. Westgate's Stage 2 renovations are currently underway to expand the arcade and utilise its surrounding, currently empty historic buildings.
There is also a North Gate and a South Gate, but what you would expect to see as East Gate is actually the Wakefield Gate. We'll explain more about this later in the film.
Halifax Minster, to the east of the Peace Hall, is the oldest building in town. While most of what we see today was built by Benedictine monks in 1438, parts of it date back to the 12th century, and this is the third church to stand on this site.
So how did we make the transformation from 26 chimneys to 2 in less than 50 years? Following a slum clearance drive in the 1930s, the town further benefited from the Clean Air Act of 1956 and 1974's Operation ISOR, the latter being a government-funded scheme brought in to reduce unemployment, remove the grime of industrialisation, and revitalise the town to give it the clean air and buildings we see today.
Halifax has always been a place of contrast and change, and there is still room for improvement, with the odd empty shop window but a ghost of its high-end past, and boarded up buildings mere shadows of their former glories. The town's triumphs and its issues dance cheek to cheek in the annals of time, and while the fate of some neglected buildings is yet to be seen, there are wheels in motion for the refurbishment of others, including India Buildings and the Theatre Royal. Halifax in the present day promises opportunity in its future developments, and it stands proud in its heritage of many eras and styles, from the ornate grandeur of the Victoria Theatre to the Art Deco McDonald's and Baroque Arcade Royale, along with the Shibden Hall, Dean Clough, Square Chapel, the Old Cock, and many more. Halifax is bursting with fine examples of the past thriving in the present, and the present leading us into a bright future.
And it's not just our architecture we're known for. Our natural valley landscape, tranquil waterways, and good old Yorkshire hospitality make Halifax a brilliant place to visit and live. Let's head down to Woolshops.
In the summer of 2023, we see a vibrant shopping district full of energy and character. From the Victorian-style shopfronts at our head to the fine sets at our feet, Woolshops today is a welcoming and accessible place to shop, eat and socialise.
You may be surprised to hear that Woolshops dates right back to the Middle Ages, where it earned its name for being quite literally where the wool shops were.
Farmers and merchants would set up stalls here to sell their wool onto local cottage weavers. The weavers would spin and weave the cloth into pieces of 30 yards to sell on. This was a lucrative industry and brought the town much wealth. After hundreds of years of trading in this way, the Peace Hall was built to accommodate the exchange, and the sun began to set on Woolshops' heyday.
Between its medieval beginnings and the modern precinct we see now, Woolshops has been on quite a journey, and it hasn't always been pretty. Halifax Civic Trust committee members Stuart Crowther and Gwyneth Crawley are now going to take us on a tour of the precinct and discover its recent past.
We're at the top of Woolshops now. Behind us is a timber frame building which has been here for hundreds of years. This is the only building that's really left of old Woolshops. But when I was growing up as a teenager, I used to come to this building regularly because it was the only place in Halifax you could buy your Levi jeans. To the other side to it, the left-hand side of the building, was a chemist called Gibsons and Dixons. That chemist we used to use when we were growing up. That was the chemist to go to. This wasn't the only timber frame building in Halifax. Going back a long time ago, there was a house just up the corner, around the corner there, called the House at the Maypole, and John Lister had that taken down and re-erected in Shibden.
That's right.
Yeah.
He did that, and I think it was a great act of courage. Well, the council wanted to demolish it. John Lister bought it from them and took it bit by bit up to the Leeds Road and re-erected it where it overlooks the Shibden Valley, and its name is
Daisy Bank.
Daisy Bank.
Okay, this is how Woolshops looks now. All these nice new shops running all the way down here. Didn't look like this before. There was lots of shops here, but they were quite run down really. The only bit of the original Woolshops is the bit down at the bottom, which did get pulled down and then rebuilt again. And I think we're going down there to look at the archway. Right, at the lower part of Woolshops, all this lot was taken down, demolished, but then rebuilt again, just as it was. The top part is all new, but this is more or less just how it was when it was originally pulled down.
This archway was and is listed, and that was a very important element in what's to follow, the listing of that archway.
When I used to come down here as an apprentice plumber, we used to come down this road here, go through that archway there, and there was a scrapyard in there. The scrapyard was called Crossley and Son, and they were wool sorters. And behind that arch there was a big warehouse, and that's what they used to use, where they kept all the scrap. In that warehouse there was a water lift. When I say a water lift, it wasn't lifting water, it was water as the power. Right, Gwyneth, it was about here, just about here where the old warehouse used to be for the scrapyard.
Yes.
Now, funnily enough, the scrapyard is still in existence. It's still actually working in Halifax. It's at Exmoor Street now, just off Parkinson Lane. It's an old family business, been going for donkey's years.
Yeah.
This is Jail Lane, by the way, and the jail for Halifax, which was a debtor's jail, was just up here where Northcote House is now. Jail Lane wasn't as wide as this. It was more like a little ginnel or an alley, whatever you want to call it these days.
There is another debtor's jail, and that's in Illingworth. These jails were in use until the constabulary was established. Together with the stocks and the manorial courts, order was maintained.
When you came down Jail Lane, you would turn right and go into a yard, and that was the yard of the Lower George pub. And it was certainly timber framed, so it must have been 16th century, was that place. There's a pub down here called Brewer's Cellar. It was round about this area here. It's a BYB pub.
As we continue our tour with Gwyneth and Stuart, let's hear from some local community voices who also remember the area well.
When I lived on St James's Road, as a young boy, and having left a bombed area of Liverpool to come here, in those days everything was going to the war effort: rubber, iron, chopping railings down, leather, you name it, it all went towards the armed forces. It wasn't until later on, when the war finished, we were able to get coal again. There was another item that you could burn, and that was coke. It was the derivative of some coal form, and it was manufactured in at the bottom end of town. And I used to have to walk down from St James's Road, North Parade, move further over down to the gas works and the coke works, as we called it, where the cooling towers were, often known in later years as Salt and Pepper. What an area to go into as a young boy. The noise, the smells, and they used to shovel the coke in, pay a sixpence, and then you had the arduous task of coming all uphill, all the way back home, this sack of coke on your back. But nevertheless, it kept us warm, so we were grateful for it.
I'm Wendy Garside. I'm 84 and I used to be a laboratory technician at Macintosh's. We used to walk up through Woolshops. There were 3 houses, and one of them, they put a 3-piece suite out in the garden. 2 years later, it was still there out in the garden. We used to laugh about it. It wasn't a very nice area, really. We used to walk up as far as Medell's, look in the window, and then carry on up into Halifax.
To my left is the Borough Market with an arcade and another arcade on the other side of the road. Turning around, in front of me now is Princess Arcade, but we always referred to it as the Lower Arcade because further on the road there was the Lower Market as opposed to the normal market.
Princess Arcade. I remember it well. My memory is that it was a strange place, always seemed very empty, rather dark, with an unusual assortment of shops. But there was only one shop we were interested in, a shop selling records. But nothing like the music shops we have today. It was stacked with singles and long-playing records. So, like typical teenagers, we were into music, Beatles, Motown, in fact anything from the top of the pops. It was a tiny shop, lots of brown wood, but it had something special. There were a couple of cubicles inside, rather like phone boxes where 2 or perhaps even 3 of us could squash in together. So we would go into the shop, ask very politely if we could listen to our favourite record as we were thinking about buying it. The man would put it on a turntable, and thanks to loudspeakers, the music would blast into the cubicle. Heaven. With the door closed, we could sing at the tops of our voices. He knew perfectly well that we didn't have any money. Of course, the next day we'd be back again, still without any money.
Okay, right, this is the site here of the Halifax Abattoir. A massive building, served Halifax for quite a number of years. The main problem with the abattoir here is animals kept escaping on more than one occasion. Quite often they'd end up into the Peace Hall, but on a couple of occasions they went down to the old gasworks in Halifax, down at Mulcher Hall. And on one particular occasion, a friend of mine who had been out on the beer all weekend was returning to work on the Monday morning, and as he walked round the corner, couldn't quite understand why all these gas fitters were stood on the top of the roofs of the vans. And then he realised when somebody shouted out, "Run, Les, run," there was a bull loose, and it wasn't very happy neither. It had just come from the abattoir.
And it had to be shot in the end.
Yeah.
I started working in the Peace Hall in 1956. The Peace Hall was the centre of the wholesale fruit and vegetable and fish in Halifax. It traded 6 days a week, with the Horton Street entrance opened at 6 o'clock and closed at 4. At the end of December in 1962, a cold blast of air arrived from the east. The temperature dropped below freezing and remained there until March. All the greengrocers suffered, as there were very short supplies of green vegetables, and any fruit like bananas would not keep either in our warehouse or in the shops. If you ever left potatoes out in the frost, the result is that they melt and turn into mush with a distinctive smell. All the rubbish that used to be collected by the council was left in a pile near Harry's Cafe. In the morning, the drivers struggled to get the wagon started, and the only way, in most cases, was to light a fire under the engine to warm the diesel. Our working conditions were poor. One day, Bill Speak, who owned J.W. Green's and had survived at a Japanese prisoner of war camp, walked down in the middle of the market and in a very loud voice shouted, "Bring out your dead! Bring out your dead!" I think that was the nadir of the 3 months.
I started work in the 1960s as an article clerk at a firm of accountants in Halifax. I remember the Woolshops in that time, and it was a busy thoroughfare. There was a butcher's on the left-hand side, and there was also a credit tailor's. What happened was that the tailor would sell a suit or a shirt or socks to a customer, and they would pay over a period of, say, 5 months, 10 months, the amount that was owed to him. Further down on the right-hand side, there was a new Talbot Inn, and just by the side of it was the abattoir, from which you could hear the cries of animals all day. After that, down Woolshops, there was nothing. All the houses had been flattened, and all that was left was the roads that used to go through the houses. The right-hand side also, there was the Peace Hall, which was a sorry sight, which was like a maroon ship because there was absolutely nothing around it. The building itself was neglected.
Woolshops as a community. There was good and there was bad. Woolshops was a mix of human activity surrounding the workshops, factories, derelict houses, pubs, the abattoir, and its attendant problems of escaping animals and cries of fear, fashion shops, music shops, butcher shops, tailors, chemists, empty spaces, outside privies, the fruit and vegetable market. It was full of sights, sounds, noise, smoke, fumes, unmade roads, nooks and crannies, and it was full of life.
Come on, Stuart.
Yeah.
We're going for a cup of medieval coffee.
Coffee, okay.
As part 2 comes to a close, let's walk the Wakefield Gate from Hipperholm to Halifax down the old Packhorse route while Gwyneth introduces us to part 3.
During the 1960s and 70s, it became very clear that shopping opportunities in Halifax were falling short of those in nearby larger towns, and that as shopping became a more and more enjoyable leisure experience, trade was leaching away. These were difficult times, and decisions were not easy to reach. In 1978, the council approved a scheme to demolish virtually all of the lower town and to build an Arndale Centre, stretching from Market Street to Winding Road and from Jail Lane to the Peace Hall, with a connecting walkway linking the two. Opinion on the council was divided. Discussion had been going on for years without a decision as the council was hung, but at last there was a plan. Halifax Civic Trust deliberated long and hard and decided they must oppose the plan. It went to public enquiry in 1979. In part 3, we're going to learn more from George Pickles, who was the Honorary Secretary of Halifax Civic Trust and also their chief witness, the public enquiry. We also made a promise to you earlier that we would explain the importance of the Wakefield Gate in relation to Woolshops. Now, we have walked all the way from Hipperholm on the ancient route, along Dark Lane, which was designated an ancient monument after it was damaged by a farmer's bulldozer. We've negotiated the exquisite paving at the elbow. We've descended into Halifax and we've passed the Church of St John, now the Minster. And now on King Street, our view and our route are blocked. Why and how did this happen? David Witcher wrote much of the commentary of our Wakefield Gate film, and he was our narrator. He's here again to talk to George. Let's join David and George now to discover how the Wakefield Gate ties into Woolshops and how Woolshops as we know it was very nearly lost.
Well, here we are, George, at on the route of the Wakefield Gate, which of course was the medieval route to the east, and for 600 years was the only way to get to the east over the very substantial hill over there. Woolshops, the medieval high street, would have been a continuation of it, and here we are confronted with these steps.
How do I get my pack horse up these steps? I appreciate they've got yellow safety markings on, but that won't help the pack horse. And in reality, it's a very poor and unsympathetic replica of a medieval route.
Of course, Woolshops was Halifax's medieval high street, and it leads directly into Wakefield Gate, which was the main pack horse route east for the export of the wool textiles produced here, via Hull and along the Great North Road, now the A1, to London. Production grew at an astonishing rate from the 15th century, so that Halifax parish was the leading textile producing area in Yorkshire. By the 17th century, 2/3 of the population of the out townships of the parish were engaged in clothing and textile manufacture. And by the 18th century, Samuel Hill, master clothier and woolen merchant of Soyland, was exporting to Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Utrecht, Antwerp, Bremen and St. Petersburg.
I suppose it's the modern needs of society trying to integrate themselves with history, and it is always difficult.
the Civic Trust managed to modify it a little bit, but you can still see.
Yeah. Yes, inevitably there had to be some compromises to make the thing commercially viable.
Exactly. Sitting here, you'd have used to see the Minster Tower. They didn't originally block the Minster, but they did latterly. Yeah. And we are sitting on the only road in the world to be called Woolshops.
Oh, it is. Yes.
Yeah. Probably wasn't granite sets when it was first built. It'd be stone sets. These would be later.
Yes, or mud.
Yeah, or mud. Yeah, it could have been mud. Yes.
My name's Margaret Barnes and I work for Calderdale Metropolitan Borough Council in the planning department. I worked there for many years from 1974 when local government was reorganised in England. When in 1974 Halifax Borough became part of the newly created Calderdale Metropolitan Borough Council, the proposals for the comprehensive development were reviewed and reconsidered. This resulted in a new brief for the development prepared by the new Chief Town Planning Officer John Stables and his Assistant Planning Officer John Thornton. I'm now going to read a few extracts from that 1974 brief. Council has specifically resolved that some of the buildings on the north side of Woolshops at its western end should be retained, refurbished and integrated into the development. The developer's attention was drawn to the historical significance of Woolshops as a highway, with its considerable local associations with the medieval era of Halifax, and that street was to be retained, probably pedestrianised. The council recognised the important architectural and historic interest of the town centre. It wanted the new development to be physically and visually integrated with the town centre, yet providing links and views to the eastern part of the town. A monolithic development or high slab frontage was to be avoided. The intention was that the development would create an attractive street scene. The development should take into account the solid stone character of the existing buildings and maintain a consistency of scale compatible with the identity of Halifax. Town and City Properties was the developer chosen by the council to submit proposals for a specified amount of retail square footage. They were asked to adhere to the terms of the 1974 brief, which respected and protected the nature of the town. At some point in its planning, the developer came back to the council and explained that the twin aims were not achievable. It could not be done. Nevertheless, they retained the contract, and the outcome was the proposal to construct the monolithic Arndale shopping mall. Planning permission was in due course granted. The decision was, however, not supported unanimously by all council members, but the majority carried the day.
Charles Crossley, the President of Halifax Civic Trust, and myself as Secretary, and the members of the Halifax Civic Trust, all set to work on looking into this proposal to do a major development which would seriously change the face of Halifax. We looked at existing Arndale centres. Manchester was particularly bad, and the chairman of their civic society wrote that it was far too big and had been nicknamed the biggest public lavatory in Europe. The exterior was clad in yellow ceramic tiles. Halifax Civic Trust learned from this and other examples that although the shopping mall gave shelter from the elements, the environmental cost was one that Halifax should not pay. We gathered support from national bodies such as the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings and many others in London, and formally challenged the council's decision. This work took many months, for which we had no formal budget. This was the first time in Halifax Civic Trust's short history that we'd challenged the council, and it was an early example of the National Civic Trust movement being prepared to stand up at a public inquiry. It was a brave action to contemplate, as so much depended on the outcome.
We are now in Halifax Town Hall, the setting of the public inquiry in 1979.
The inquiry was chaired by Mr. McBride, here represented by John Patchett behind me. On this side we have the Halifax Civic Trust team, represented by George Pickles, then the Secretary, and Damien Cole, representing the first witness. And on this side we have the council team, represented by Margaret Barnes, Planning Officer at the time, and Gwyneth Crawley, representing Mr. Boydell QC.
Good afternoon. May we have the first witness for the objectors?
I am a gardener. I have worked for the council for 20 years and have cared for 2 roundabouts at Bull Green and Victoria Theatre during this time. I have also studied the plans for development, and it is not right for the town.
Is that all you have to say?
That is all I have to say, sir.
Mr. Boydell, have you any questions?
No questions, sir.
May we have the next witness?
So, I am George Pickles, Honorary Secretary of Halifax Civic Trust since 1970. The Trust has been happy to work with Calderdale Metropolitan Borough Council over the last few years on such projects as the conservation of the Peace Hall, the creation of the first conservation area in London Village, and the Calderdale Way, a walking route right round the valley of Calderdale, a celebration of the formation of the new Metropolitan Borough Council. The Arndale scheme before you today requires the demolition of a row of listed or conserved buildings which define the ancient packhorse route which linked Halifax to the world beyond. It is felt that this feature of the town should be respected, and this scheme does not do that. I am a local architect by profession, and to avoid any hint of a vested interest, the Trust has taken the advice of the Historic Buildings Council and appointed architects Fielding and Mawson from Norwich, who will be showing ways in which this part of the town could be developed without compromising the context and unique sense of place. We thank the following persons for their valuable assistance: Gillian Pawson, Town Planner and member of the Halifax Civic Trust, Paul Iredale, Linda Watson, and the Huddersfield School of Architecture, and many others in the Halifax Civic Trust. Paul and I have prepared this drawing of the north side of Woolshops, showing the historic buildings and the gentle incline of Woolshops, which I now hand to you, sir.
Mr. Boydell, any questions?
Not until we've heard the other witnesses,
Thank you for your submissions today. I shall consider my decision and communicate it to you in due course. Thank you.
Halifax Civic Trust's early attempts to work with the council had met with no success. The level of local and national opposition to the Arndale scheme convinced the Trust that it was right to honour its guiding principles and attempt to safeguard the character of the townscape of Halifax. The public inquiry took place over 4 days in November 1978. The case for a conservation approach to developing the historic town, put forward by officers of the Trust and its architects, was accepted by the advocate for the council, Peter Boydell QC, as sincere. It was also noted that Planning Inspector Mr. McBride retained the Trust's drawing of how the north side of Woolshops could look in front of him for the duration of the hearing.
Mr McBride's 27-page decision letter was dated the 18th of January 1979, but it took Secretary of State Michael Heseltine until July the 11th to release the decision. Local headlines: Arndale, the knockout. The details of the inspector's decision were well considered, made good reading, and deserve reviving. Essentially, he supported the Trust and its architects' arguments for conservation and recommended that the council should consult the Halifax Civic Trust in future. The Secretary of State supported the decision.
The result of the reversal of the council's plan was a rethink and a compromise. The enormous tin shed retail outlets went elsewhere on appeal, as there was no space for them in the town centre. A certain amount of shuffling went on over the next few years. Sainsbury's moved to the Northgate site. Marks and Spencer, the anchor store, moved into the Woolshops area. Car parking was created and is well used. The original street pattern of the Woolshops slope was rebuilt and enhanced with ornate cast iron canopies sheltering shoppers from the elements. All the listed buildings were retained and rebuilt, but the vista, the view of the parish church, now the Minster, was broken by the steps to the M&S car park, and the hills to the east are barely seen.
It was the coming of age of the Halifax Civic Trust, and the result of the inquiry attracted national attention. This led to the publication of Halifax, the Case for Conservation, with contributions from national figures and members of the Joint Committee of National Amenity Societies. Sales of this publication cleared the Trust's costs for the inquiry. It also helped to attract expert witnesses to support the Trust's next successful challenge, to resist the demolition of Square Chapel by the Council. This work has to continue, as it is possible to detect that some of the conservation principles supported by the inspector's decision have already been diluted within the boundaries of the historic town of Halifax. To quote from John Betjeman, Poet Laureate, who also supported us, Halifax is full of character and hidden beauty. The Peace Hall is symbolic of its hidden and great worth. The skyline of Halifax, its churches, chapels, mills and warehouses, is something never to be forgotten and gives Halifax its identity.
We worked for more than 6 months to put this film together. We followed the town's organic growth and development from the Middle Ages to the mid-20th century.
And we're thankful that Halifax Civic Trust had the courage in 1978 to prevent an atrocity from destroying patterns of living that had been centuries in the making. Some of it was lost, but it could have been worse. A lot remained, carefully preserved.